Welcome, everyone. I'm Jody Rains. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar on innovations in proactive physical security for energy substations. As you can see, we have a great lineup of speakers who are looking forward to sharing their knowledge and experience on this topic. One quick change, however, unfortunately, our moderator will not be joining us, so you're stuck with me, Jody Rains. Before we hear from our speakers, I will quickly go through some background on NARUC and the Center for Partnerships and Innovation. Founded in 1889, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or NARUC, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to representing the state public service commissions who regulate the utilities that provide essential services such as energy, telecommunications, power, water, and transportation. Our mission as NARUC is to serve in the public interest by improving the quality and effectiveness of public utility regulation. Our members are the state public utility commissions from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, representing membership of roughly 250 elected and appointed state commissioners and over 1,000 commission staff in energy, electricity, telecommunications, water, and transportation regulation. My role as Senior Cybersecurity Policy Specialist is within NARUC's Center for Partnerships and Innovation, or CPI. CPI is the group that provides technical assistance to our members. We do that in a variety of ways, including webinars like this, conducting trainings, regulatory roundtables, white papers, podcasts, manuals, guides, working groups, and more on topics of interest to our membership. The link at the bottom of the screen leads to our fact sheet, which lists many of the work products we offer, as well as a description of our organization. We thank the Department of Energy for funding this and other efforts. The Center for Partnerships and Innovation hosts a number of virtual and in-person events. Here's a list of some of our upcoming events, and if you'd like more information on any of these events, please reach out to Jessica Diaz, who is on this webinar, and she'll drop her information in the chat. Of note, I would like to mention that we will have a regulators roundtable series on wildfires and affordability. There's a couple of regulatory roundtables, as you can see, and our Summer Policy Summit will be held July 14th to 17th in West Palm Beach, Florida. With that, we'll jump into our podcast. We are fortunate to have an esteemed group of speakers today, including Lonnie Ratcliffe, from Director of Compliance Assurance and Certification from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, Brady Phelps, who is the Entity Monitoring Physical Security Lead from the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, Elizabeth Leiber, who is an FBI agent working on national security matters. We also have Jim Bruncati, who is the Bureau Chief, Emergency Management, Division of Reliability and Security for the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. And we also have Greg Demeter, who is the Project Coordinator for Jersey City Newark Urban Area Security Initiative, or UASI. And I hope I pronounced that correctly. With that, we're going to jump right into our first speaker, who will introduce himself, Lonnie Ratcliffe. Ronnie, are you there?
Hey, Jody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for NARUC inviting NERC and to help support this. My name is Lonnie Ratcliffe. I am the Director of Compliance Assurance and Certification at NERC. I've been there about 7 years. Prior to that, I spent 4 years at CERC, and prior to that, I spent like 9 years consulting around the SIP standards. So I've got quite a bit of experience with the NERC SIP standards, and I'm just presenting and letting providing a little insight on the SIP standards, specifically around physical security, so substations physical security. Next slide, please. So we talk about SIP 14 or substation security. Let's go to the beginning. Let's talk about risks and what risks were out there. We knew there were risks out there around substation security, but it all come to light really in April 16, 2013. Everybody's well aware probably of the Metcalf substation attack. If you didn't know, I mean, 17 transformers got gunfire, fiber optic cables severed, over $15 million worth of damage. But what was interesting, and if you go to read a lot of the public reports, you'll see that there was no fingerprints on casings, and I still don't think there's any known people prosecuted around that event. So, talking about a professional job, I mean, you go back to that. And what was interesting is the power grid did exactly what it was supposed to do, right? It kept it localized. However, it did bring up the risk of cascading, or the evil three, as we call it, the cascading and separation in interconnections. So that's where it all started. So out of that come the FERC issued an order around physical security in March of 2014 based on this event. It says, hey, we need a substation protection standard for these critical substations and control centers. So you'll see that NERC and industry collaboratively got together, approved version 1 of SIP 14, and really faced or was focusing on that substation security, transmission stations that are very critical to the power grid. Next slide. And everybody thought, well, it's going to end there. Well, it doesn't, right? I mean, for people that follow as much substation security, I'll start from the bottom. There's a lot of gunfire. We see that across the higher transmission lines. I know a lot of people see that in the distribution side. A lot of copper theft, with copper prices continually rising. But another item that really caught the eye of a lot of people was the Moore County, North Carolina attacks. 2 distribution substations. However, they were on the major transmission lines. However, there was a lot of impact there. 40,000 customers impacted. Once again, the grid did operate the way it was supposed to do and kept it localized. Kept it localized where it didn't cascade and impact a lot more customers. So it's great. But this highlights the importance of SIP 14 and performing those risk assessments against these critical substations. And then we talk about the Northwest attacks. A lot of people those weren't in the news nearly as public. And I think Brady's going to cover some of those later on. But there were 15 attacks from June 2022 to January 2023. And then we talk about the Maryland substation attack. There was a tax plan. The key point of this slide is there's not just threats out there looking at 1 substation or 2 substations. There's a lot of planned attacks around the transmission grid that also applies over to distribution, right? People want to take malicious actions to disrupt people. And I think Elizabeth and others are going to get into the intel and some around the intel that information is. When we look at it from NERC perspective about the standards and protecting about 100 kV and above right now, we're looking at the minimal security baseline of SIP 14 and how can we protect those critical substations to make sure that we keep events localized and they don't cascade outside past that. Next slide, please. So where do we go? So you'll see all the events, the Metcalf event, which started the SIP 14. You see the ongoing threats of a lot of substations get attacked, whether it's malicious or not. There's a lot of times you can't tell the intent, but you can see the consequences of the gunfire, right? They may not know that they're hitting a critical substation, but we know the consequences of taking out critical substations could lead to a lot of bad things, hospitals, loss of life, things like that. So based on the December 2022 FERC order, they said, hey, look at this, right? There's a lot of different attacks coming. What needs to be done is the risk assessments appropriate. Should there be a minimum level of physical security protections for all bulk power system transmission? These are the things that we considered in our August 2023 FERC-NERC Physical Security Conference. And we had a lot of conversations around, okay, we know the industries are registered entities that are required to comply with NERC standards. They kind of tier things, right? They're going to protect things, but are they applying minimal things? And we know as it applies out to the distribution, out to the state level, how can we share our best practices, what we've learned on the transmission side, on the bulk power side, and share those lessons learned with the distribution side, saying, hey, the standards are minimal baseline, but what can we do outside of just compliance obligation and use those best practices to learn from each other, some things that work, some things that we see that get implemented on the bulk power system that really work well. And I think Brady can talk really well to that. when he gets into it about what he sees in the field around things that are very cost effective and work very well compared to just doing stuff to comply with the standard, check the box, and saying, hey, we're secure because we check the box and we're compliant with the standard requirement. But that's a broad overview of the standards and requirements that we have at NERC that apply to the bulk power system. And I think I'm going to send it back to Jody, and we can go on around the risk and around the intel and where we need to go from there. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, Lonnie. That was awesome. And certainly there's a lot going on in this space. It's more than just copper wire theft. And to give us a perspective of what they're seeing out in the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, I'd like to introduce next Brady Phelps, who is the Entity Monitoring Physical Security Lead. Brady, you want to take it?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Brady Phelps. I am the Entity Monitoring Physical Security Lead at WEC. So I pretty much manage and conduct all of the physical security audits in the Western Interconnection, so the 14 Western states in Canada. Happy to join this group and kind of discuss the perspective of what we're seeing out west from the compliance, from a compliance standpoint and a physical security standpoint. And I think what's key is to kind of jump into what Lonnie had set me up for is the attacks that we had out west. Started with Metcalf, and one of the things that I think is most important and that we're seeing recently is that how threats have evolved from Metcalf. So Metcalf was one single site attack, and what we've seen in the last couple of years is multiple coordinated attacks on different facilities. Is one case in point. Another one in the Pacific Northwest had a distribution substation was attacked, not to attack the substation, however, to shut down power to other businesses so that they could rob those businesses. So we have a whole bunch of reasons why our substations might be attacked. So as auditors, we go out there and we work with our entities to see how they're developing their threats and vulnerabilities for these critical SIP14 sites. But also we're really taking a key interest in our low impact substations as well, the distribution subs, anything that falls under NERC SIP 3, R2 Section 2 Attachment 1, and any of that low impact physical security, and always SIP 6 as well. Jumping into those coordinated attacks and some of the things that we're seeing in the Pacific Northwest, we work with entities and we've pretty much done multiple iterations of the SIP14 audit for all of our entities out west. However, as threats evolve, we need to continue that partnership and that relationship with these entities because you can't think of everything when you're trying to develop these threats and vulnerabilities and mitigations under 5.1, that are designed to deter, detect, delay, assess, communicate, and respond to those threats that you've identified. An example would be, we had 2 dams in the Pacific Northwest, an individual, and these kind of in remote wooded areas, and the individual was able to approach the substation via a dirt bike and conduct a ballistic attack against that dam, destroy critical equipment within that substation. He was then able to leave, go to the next dam upstream, attack that one before apprehended. Eventually he was apprehended. But that goes to speak, the entities always need to keep aware of information coming from EISAC, from our federal law enforcement partners, local and state law enforcement as well, and any kind of internal intelligence sources that you may have to see what's going on in the industry and notice that shift from maybe we're not seeing as many directed attacks against a singular SIP14 sites. And I'm of the opinion that we've done so much work in SIP14 that we're starting to see maybe a little bit of, we're shifting the target for focus away from these heavily secured substations that require that SIP14 compliance standard to maybe some of the more of these smaller distribution or medium impact substations that don't have quite as many security mitigation implementations as a SIP14 site might have. Taking a close look at how that threat evolves is important. And then what we've noticed is that the successful entities are the ones that have the ability to push out detection sooner or further away, and that would increase their timeline to respond. Everything in SIP 14, as far as R4 through R6 goes, is all about identifying your threats and vulnerabilities. What's the most likely attack approach for your particular unique site? And then how can we identify that threat before it initiates its attack? Once the identification occurs, then we kind of start a timeline. And in that timeline, we have to accomplish assessment, communication, and respond. So we detect, we delay, assess, communicate, and respond. And the successful entities are creating that detection, accomplishing the assessment to know that this is a real threat to our substation. They're delaying them long enough, and they're increasing their ability to respond to that prior to the attack being successful and causing instability, cascading, and separation. So out west, we're really working closely with our low impact distribution substations. We have a lot coming on board, up to like 400 in the next year. So we'll have a lot of entities to work with on low impact substations, and take into account and trying to stay abreast with all the threats and how they evolve. I'll pause there for now.
Thanks, Brady. And one of the things that we see being in our perspective at NARUC are when we see certain states that are doing things that are a little bit different, or taking that next step, that next step to defend or protect or to mitigate things that could potentially be happening. And New Jersey has kind of bubbled to the top as a case study. I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Labor, who is with the FBI. She's an FBI agent who works on national security matters. And Elizabeth, I'm curious how, tell us a little bit about yourself, and how did it come about that your relationship with New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, how did that all come about?
Yeah, thanks, Jody. I appreciate it. My name's Elizabeth Labor. I'm an agent here at FBI Newark. I sit on a national security squad, so we are focused on really foreign intelligence operations in the United States, but then also things that come to mind would be infrastructure protection. We are looking into critical infrastructure within the United States, and within the state of New Jersey particularly, we developed contact with Board of Public Utilities. They've been a fantastic asset to us. So for my brief presentation today, I'm just going to go over a little bit about the importance of intelligence sharing between us and our partners. So really, when we're talking about intelligence sharing, we're talking about, between the federal government as well as with our state, local, and private sector partners. Today's focus really is on the physical security, but coming from that national security side, we've recognized that there is a huge overlap between physical security concerns, cybersecurity, as well as those national security threats. When we're talking about national security, we're looking at things such as the supply chain, insider threat, foreign hostile actors, as well as protecting the proprietary information of some of our utility companies. So overall, the most important thing that we found with the intelligence sharing is that it's a two-way street. We really hope that for us, when we reach out to individuals like the Board of Public Utilities and we meet with Jim and Brian, that we can share information that is valuable and relevant to them. So we view the Board of Public Utilities really as a subject matter expert. They really help us to understand the threat, and also threat mitigation strategies. So we have been able to share our questions and our concerns related to vulnerabilities that we have seen from our side of the intelligence community. And BPU has been able to share many successful mitigation strategies that they themselves have implemented or that they have seen implemented. So that's been extremely valuable to us as an organization, but also to the intelligence community in general. So really for us, we're learning about what's going on within the state of New Jersey. We're learning about, the patterns and successes, and that really has helped us to narrow our focus as an agency. And as I said, really has benefited the entire intelligence community in general. And I know Brady was touching on this earlier in his presentation, but really it's that getting out there and speaking with your local and your state partners, as they really are the boots on the ground, and they're seeing this every single day. So we view this feedback and knowledge that we get from subject matter experts like the Board of Public Utilities as invaluable to us. We've established regular meetings with them, and they've really helped us to identify trends within, as we're focusing today, the physical security side of things, but also, as I mentioned, the cyber and national security threats as well. So we really value our subject matter experts. We think it's essential and crucial that we have this two-way information sharing with them to broadly understand the threat, but also to really narrow our focus as well. So thank you, Jody.
I think that's terrific, and I agree. It's a two-way conversation, especially for those of us who are at public utility commissions, to understand that we do have a voice and that it's a two-way street. We need to be talking with our Federal Bureau of Investigation and other intel services. With that, I'd like to next move to Jim Bruncati. Jim Bruncati is the Bureau Chief for Emergency Management within the Division of Reliability and Security at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. Truth be told, I did have the opportunity to work with Jim. He's a good guy. Jim, tell us a little bit about your story, who you are, how you got to the board, and maybe share a little bit about this program that you started with regard to the physical security of substations.
Yes, thank you, Jody. Yeah, my name is Jim Bruncati. I actually come from a law enforcement background, spent 25 years with the state police, about 12 and a half years with the State Department of Health, and they fired me. So the Board of Public Utilities was nice enough to pick me up. As I say, I'm not an engineer, but I'm in my 47th year working for the state. And it's been great. I feel I've reached my level of incompetence. I'm right where I should be because we actually work at a state police headquarters. Now, New Jersey has the luxury of being one of two states where the director of emergency management is also the superintendent of state police. So we work out of their fusion center, which gives us access to, people such as Liz and to Greg. And I'll say before anything else that preparedness is relationships. That's, the more phone numbers you have in your phone, the more contacts you have, the more protected we are. Because originally, when I got here about 9 years ago, we were more concerned with weather incidents, which certainly impact us greatly. And it's only in more recent times that we've had to worry about attacks on substations. So, how do you mitigate? How do you protect a substation from the weather? Well, we've done some things after storms. We've dedicated funding to harden about over 20 substations, raise equipment, put up dams. So after the last big storm, we had no outages from those substations. So we know that that's working. Now, as far as physical attacks, we've had some in the state. Mostly what we get are copper thefts and break-ins and things of that sort. But we've worked with Homeland Security, the FBI, the UASI, which is the Urban Area Security Initiative that Greg will talk about, the State Police Bureau of Infrastructure and Protection Bureau, and with the electric companies themselves to identify the most critical substations that we have. Because as I always say, if everything's important, nothing's important. So we took the most critical and we said, well, how can we do a better job in protecting these? So we met with Liz and others from the Newark office of the FBI and said, what is your perspective? What are you looking at? What do you expect on the intelligence side that we can, really truly identify what are the most critical that would have the most impact if attacked? Then when I go every day at the ROC, there's what we call a huddle, and all the alphabet of FBI, Homeland Security, both federal and state, everyone, we get together and we talk about what's gone on in the last, 24 hours. It takes 15 or 20 minutes. I happened to be at one of those meetings where Greg Demeter was, and we started talking about an incident that happened at a substation, I believe. And he approached me and said, well, we have some measures that we can bring, such as automated license plate readers. Even though we have many substations that are in urban areas on city streets, we also have them, a mile down a dirt road. So being able to identify who's coming and going in these substations could be very important because, as was said, some of the attacks, there's been no prosecutions, and we want to make sure that there's some consequences to those attacks. So, working with Greg, working with Liz, then started working with Homeland Security with the emergency preparedness group task force. and we secured about $500,000 in funding to now get funding for cameras for 41 substations in New Jersey. So we're building it out slowly. And I understand, you have to get then to the lesser impacted, but we start at the top and work down. We've even done this with substations on military bases. We've met with the 4 major military bases in New Jersey. We brought in the utilities. We talked about what services the utilities offer the base, and then who to talk to in an emergency. So we're trying to strengthen all these relationships. So when the true disaster arrives, we know who to call, who to talk to. It's just extremely important. So to kind of wrap it up and pass it on so you can hear about what we've done and how we've done it. But I also want to mention the human side, because right now we're talking about equipment. We go out and we do 60 inspections a year on stations for physical security, but there's also the human side. And Greg is going to go into that. But in New Jersey, we have the See Something, Say Something program. We go out and train people on what to look for, what to call in as suspicious activity, and we investigate, every one of those. So, Jody, I will turn it back to you now for further explanation by the experts.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you. And without a whole lot of ado, I'd like to introduce Greg Demeter. Greg is the project coordinator for Jersey City and Newark Urban Area Security Initiative. Greg, you've got a background in law enforcement. You've been doing a lot with regard to securing the substations. Maybe give us a little bit of an idea about your background and explain how the program works.
Yes, good afternoon, Jody. I have been with the Urban Area Security Initiative for 3 years as a consultant, where I focus on red teaming, and I'll explain that in a moment. I also part-time wear a hat in the automated license plate recognition world with the New Jersey State Police as a senior policy advisor, which that is what it sounds like. We write a lot of the documents that are necessary, but nobody usually wants to write. Prior to that, I did 25 years with the New Jersey State Police as well, mainly in the counterterrorism and investigative branches. So with what we do with the red teaming, physical red teaming, many of you might have heard of the concept, and a lot of people related to the cyber world. What we do, and full disclosure, we piggybacked this program right off of the New York State, who has a very robust version of it. They've been doing it for about 10 years. We work with them to develop ours, but essentially what we do is we pick locations that are likely to be targets of terrorism or used to facilitate terrorism. Critical infrastructure certainly falls in the first category, and maybe at times in the second. But we then do a See Something, Say Something campaign for workers or people who live near those areas. But then what we'll do, we'll go back 4 to 5 weeks later and have plainclothes police officers exhibit the signs of suspicious activity to see A, if anybody picks up on it, B, if the suspicious activity is picked up upon, do the workers or people living in the area know what to do with that? And thirdly, do they actually make the call? Because a lot of times there's been many instances we can all think of where after the fact, somebody says, yeah, you know what, I saw that and that was suspicious, but it's after an event already happened, rather than saying it ahead of time where it can be prevented. What this serves to do, really, it's an exercise more than a test, but it serves to keep everybody on their toes. Nobody likes to have a pop quiz, but certainly nobody likes to fail a pop quiz. And we don't put it that way, but people know when they do well or not. And it just serves to reinforce anything you can read in a pamphlet or hear in a video takes hold a lot more in a person when it actually happens to you in real life. And you, even if it's for a 10 or 15-minute period, you live through it and you think something might be going on. So that's how we work that. One thing I want to impress upon, you mentioned it and Jim mentioned it as well. When I was hired to implement the red team, I had ideas of what I thought it would be and what I thought it would take to make it work. Some of those were true, but what I did learn more so than anything else is it is the partnerships that make this work, and it also helps bring people together. So when I do a red team, and we've red team exercise, and we've done several of them now on critical infrastructure sites in New Jersey, everybody's involved, from the local municipal police force all the way up to the FBI is aware of it, state police, New Jersey Homeland Security in between. If we're doing a utility, Board of Public Utilities is involved, the county, the security director of the utility is also involved. And what this does, many times some of those people know each other, but rarely does everybody I just mentioned know each other, and then know each other well. It's different to know a name, or maybe have talked to somebody on the phone for a minute. It takes a whole new level when you shake somebody's hand and you run an exercise with them for an hour, hour and a half. And it makes it so much easier. Once you go through those steps, it makes it easier to handle whatever comes up when a real incident happens, rather than trying to make those relationships on the fly when you're trying also to investigate or mitigate something that happened. I'll say a little bit more is that we've run two, one at a water supply company and another at one of our bigger electrical providers in New Jersey. And while initially with the first one, there's a little bit of hesitation with the concept as we explained it, this is with the electric provider, they understood the concept and really became a partner in it. We had to talk through a lot. I also realized there's a lot of salesmanship in my position, because these bigger companies, especially public companies, are going to have attorneys that are going to ask a lot of questions, which is fine, and I'll answer them. But we worked through it all and created a really good partnership, and they were very happy with the program and the exercise as they went through, and we did a full debriefing afterwards. As the same, then we did the same thing with the water company. So a lot of work up front, a lot more than I ever thought it would be, but it definitely paid dividends in the long run.
That's awesome. Now, a question, Greg. When you did this red teaming project, my understanding, and tell me if I got this correctly, you went in and you trained people on what to look for, and then you ran actors or somebody who posed doing whatever the activity was that they were supposed to be looking for, and then you monitored whether you received calls or were informed that something was going on. Is that correct? That's
right. So we didn't do a training, so to speak, as much as an awareness. And it's done in several ways. Sometimes it's electronic distribution. Other times we will go into places with police officers, identifying themselves and taking a few minutes to speak with staff members. We do it a variety of ways, but we get that awareness out there. Now, sometimes there are certain businesses that really take it to heart and pay attention to it. Other times the flyer might end up in the trash can 30 seconds after we walk out the door, but we've had some successes. The first one of these we did in New Jersey, and it wasn't at a critical infrastructure site. It was actually at a downtown area of an affluent town in New Jersey. It has a train station, bus stops going into New York City, and it's a lot of restaurants. In the spring and summer, it gets very crowded. It would be a very inviting, soft target if somebody wanted to do some damage. But the point is, we went to an establishment, a business across the street from the train station and bus stop. And when we ran, we did the awareness. We went back 4 weeks later, we ran our exercise. And if I could have written up the scenario of how those employees would have reacted, I couldn't have done a better job than what they really did. One employee picked up on it, notified the manager. The manager, we're in the middle of it, already called the police station because the local police is out with us. Took down information, was pulling video off their camera system to give to the police by the time we walked up. And then when we went in 15 minutes later, myself and a lieutenant from the police force, the manager was holding the flyer that we gave them 30 days prior. That's what he used to call the local police department, and he was reading off the stuff. So they did it perfectly, but there's other times that it doesn't work so perfectly. But in any event, that's how it all comes together.
So it's about awareness.
Yes.
Excellent. I'm going to ask Brady to come back on, and Brady, you have more of an auditor role, my understanding is. Can you please kind of like bring it home and tie this together with regard to what is going on in New Jersey and how you're perceiving it with regard to your programs?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, our speakers touched on three very important parts of not only maintaining compliance with substation security and the NERC SIP requirements that an entity might have with it, be it low impact, medium, or high being the SIP 14 examples. And that would be, processes that really feed into the compliance standards. And we touched on intelligence and license plate readers and other surveillance technologies. And also we just touched on red teams. So I wanted to kind of circle back from the auditor perspective on how we can use these to improve not only our compliance program, but also our security posture in general. Because if we can have better security, that would lead to better compliance. And to do that, we need to be more effective at what we're implementing. So I'll start with intelligence. Intelligence is very important under NERC SIP 14, especially that R4 threat and vulnerability assessment. If you're not getting, recent or up-to-date and effective intelligence for what's going on in your region and abroad across North America, it's going to be really hard to effectively shape your R4 threat and vulnerability assessment. And the compliance risk to entities that have compliance responsibilities would be that if we have ineffective threats and vulnerabilities, it could potentially lead to non-compliance, meaning we're putting all of our eggs towards the wrong basket. So we want to make sure that we have that good and reliable intelligence that's coming from the sources, local and state and federal law enforcement, any kind of internal intelligence teams your organization might have. And intelligence really feeds into 5.4, which is the evolving threats. Not only R4, but 5.4, which is evolving threats and corresponding security measures. So we've identified our threats and vulnerabilities, but how are they evolving? The example we gave earlier in the presentation was singular attacks against these critical substations like Metcalf, evolving into more frequently now some of these lower impact substations, and also more than this one at the same time. I'm remembering back to during COVID, the release of a document that came through Telegram, ended up having a book sold on Amazon. And it was a list from environmental terrorist organization that, their goal was to attack our substations and eliminate electricity in the country or the world so they can get back to nature and all of that. And they really targeted, did their research on what substations were critical, and they listed them. They actually called Metcalf a failure. And the reason they did that is because, one, it didn't cause widespread instability, cascading, or separation, but also it brought forth NERC SIP 14, which increased the security posture for a lot of our critical substations across the country. They did, in fact, call for, hold off, don't get noticed by law enforcement, but let's work on how we can attack and coordinate against multiple substations. That's just one example of some of the intelligence that comes through. So we use that to shape our threat and vulnerability assessment. The 5.4 evolving threats, how they're changing, and then also 5.3, which is our timeline for executing security enhancements. So as we're using intelligence to see how threats change, we also need to change our implementation of security measures aimed to mitigate those threats. So really using that intel to shape 5.3 is important as well. Detection, I talked about the timeline and how we set up our response under R5.1, deter, detect, delay, assess, communicate, and respond. I think detections, the things that are happening out in New Jersey are good. Getting that money to put in cameras, license plates, will always increase detection. And if we can increase detection, we can increase assessment, and then we can get our response out there sooner. I really like to key in, though, on the work that's being done on red teams. In the West, when I'm auditing our entities out here, the entities that are doing red teams are most often the most effective entities in compliance and in physical security implementation as well. And that's because red teams are a great way to shape the effectiveness of your 5.1 measures of security measures and resiliency designed to deter, detect, delay, assess, communicate, and respond, because you can shape your red teams to be the threats that you've identified in R4 and then test your defenses against the threats in real time. Now, I'm not saying go shoot your substation if we've identified ballistics. However, you can test how soon you're detecting somebody with a rifle. How far out can you push that detection, and can you test then your response to that threat, acting like it would be any of your design basis threats, and shaping through adversarial sequence diagrams how that threat is going to actually conduct their attack. You can also test your mitigations in 5.3, and that's going to save you a lot of money if you're planning on implementing a lot of new security technologies. That's going to cost a lot of money. So you can use red teams to test one site to see if the implementations that you've installed are actually effective before deploying it to multiple sites as well. And then finally, you can lean on those evolving threats that we see throughout the industry from our local and state and federal partners to shape your red teams as well. So as the intel changes and comes through on how these threats will change, then we can red team against that as well. So all three of that intel, technology, and red teams is really good and often a best practice that we see out west when we're conducting our audits.
So
Jody, if I could just jump on something Brady said regarding the intelligence and the red teams. Interestingly, in one of the red team exercises that we conducted on our electrical provider, on the same day we tested 3 different substations in 3 different counties. And we had the same role players playing the roles and using the same vehicle in all 3 of the counties. And let's say one started at 9 a.m., one was around noon, one was around 2:30. And by the time we finished up and went back to the headquarters of this company to debrief, each site picked up on the suspicious activity, reported it internally, and their internal investigations had a workup on our vehicle, photos of our actors there. It was already shared within the organization. So my point is, you talked about intelligence and you're dead on. Internal intelligence, not just sharing with external law enforcement agencies, but having the capacity to share information within your own organization. The second red team we did, the company was not so robust and able to share information. We did 5 or 6 sites again over the course of the same day. None of that was connected up. We had the security director with us, so he knew it was connected up, but they didn't connect those dots. And we don't know how long it would have taken them to connect those dots. So they learned their gaps through that as well. But a good, robust internal intelligence sharing in an organization. Now, New Jersey is obviously a pretty small geographic state. I imagine out west, some of these electrical providers are widespread geographically. But it is important to have that intelligence connection when something is learned so everybody else can learn from it without having to go through it.
Yeah, and I wanted to, you made me think of something else too. An important aspect of red team can also shrink your compliance obligation as well. And I think that's a benefit to organizations they're looking at, because in physical security, we always have to justify spending, because how do you create metrics against something that maybe hasn't happened yet, right? So if you're being really good at physical security and you're being really effective at that first part of deter, so you're just deterring the threat altogether, how as a physical security practitioner can you demonstrate through metrics that you're being effective and need to continue the budgetary obligations that you have? And I think shrinking compliance obligations would be, and I'll give an example of an entity out west. A lot of the threats that we get, and some from the AISAC itself, would be handmade explosives thrown over the fence, right? And so when we go to an entity and we look at the explosives that they've identified or developed, we're looking at weight, material, and then also the composition and how it would react. So how big is the explosion? What is the spalling and the debris look like? And is that going to cause damage to your critical components within your substation? And what an entity did that was really cool was they went out and their threat was a 5-pound weight or 15-pound weight and weighted explosive thrown over the fence line, trying to get close to their critical components to cause damage, which would lead to instability, cascading, and separation. So they went out and found the strongest lineman that they could, right? And so they handed him a 15-pound dumbbell and they said, throw that over the fence as hard and as far as you can. And that person was unable to throw it over the fence and get it close enough to it would be within the blast radius of what a 15-pound explosive would look like, and it would cause no damage to the critical components in there. So they were able to actually eliminate that threat altogether from their SIP 14 plan, and they documented that process that they went through to test it, and they showed it at audit. And as an auditor, I thought it was awesome. And I'm like, cool, we don't have to look at this as a threat to you anymore. So I was able to shrink their threat number, which means they could then take and prioritize their limited budget to other more likely threats. So red teams are really good at kind of shrinking and testing what's not impossible, not just what's possible out of sight.
I'm going to change the direction a little bit because I'm curious. You're going into these substations. The substations are owned by the utilities. They're not part of the board's. They're part of the jurisdiction, but not necessarily something that the board can say, we're going to go in and we're going to evaluate your security. And I'm wondering, I guess, Jim, if you're still here, or if anybody wants to jump in, what kind of pushback did you get, and how were you able to have the utilities work with you?
We really don't get a lot of pushback. As a matter of fact, in view of what's happening around the world, they're happy for the information, and they're really upping their physical security and their cybersecurity and their relationships, because it's good business practice. So we really don't get a lot of pushback. They're able to be evaluated by us, by New Jersey Homeland Security, by federal. So they have access to a lot of different entities that can come in and do evaluations for them for free. And they welcome the information, and they always respond. They think it's just good business practice.
I will say, Jody, if I hadn't worked through Jim, let's say, because I'm no longer in law enforcement, and I could have tried to reach out to people directly, I don't know that I would have even gotten callbacks. I'm doing my homework, finding out who are the right people to speak to get me to the right people to speak to. Jim has all these established relationships with the power companies. Now, I had fleeting relationships in law enforcement with the security directors at a couple of these places who may or may not have remembered me, but I might still be trying to get a meeting with them if I had tried on my own. But realizing I'm going to work through the partnerships that are already established made my life a lot easier, and that's why we had no pushback, in my opinion.
I will speak from the Western Interconnection. So WEC, we've in the last few years, primarily since COVID and getting back out to the entities, we've really shifted our focus more from that hammer of compliance to more of a partnership and developing this relationship with our entities, to where my phone rings off the hook now of entities that would call and say, hey, Brady, I'm thinking about doing this for my substation. What do you think from a compliance or security standpoint? And that used to never happen 5 years ago, right? It was like, don't talk to WEC, put them in the dungeon, leave them there for 5 days and let them do their audit, but don't tell them anything without a lawyer being there. We've really changed that perspective in the West as far as that partnership and relationship that we're building. And I think that physical security teams are starting to get more funding and be more effective with their implementation of these security technologies. Because as WEC, we're going into the entity and saying, hey, I know you looked at this, but intelligence doesn't say that it's happening. Prior history of attack isn't saying that it's happening. And you're putting a bunch of resources into that, which it's good to be aware of. However, it's not really happening. And an example of that would be VBIEDs, right? Yes, it's something we have to be aware of. It's definitely an attack vector. We're just not seeing it to the scale that entities are putting it as a threat, being a box truck of 5,000 pounds of explosives. There's no history of that to the critical infrastructure industry. However, I'm not saying it's not possible, and we should be aware of it. And then have those, 5.4 measures of evolving threats and corresponding security measures to where if that threat does evolve, we can react to it. But working with these entities and saying, you should really focus on this because it's more likely, it's more effective, and it is happening throughout the country. they can then better shape their programs of threat and vulnerabilities, and then also the money that they're spending on that to be more effective from a compliance standpoint and a physical security standpoint. So I give it to the relationships that WEC as a whole has changed in the last 5 years of being more of a partner with our entities.
Jody, can I also jump in here? When utilities are required to report when a certain percentage of their service territory is down. And we don't wait for that. When I got on the job, I went to each of the 4 EDCs, sat in their office and said, look, if it's going to be in the newspaper, if they're going to be calling the governor's office, if it's outside your normal operation for that day, just give us a call, make us aware. And that's why, and again, being at the Fusion Center, the mantra is flat, fast communications. And that's what we try for. So we've developed that relationship. We protect it, even though we're a regulator. When we have to do an after action report on a major event, we say, look, if you're right, we're going to defend you. Okay. Because we've developed, we trust them and they trust us to give us that information. So that's extremely important. As Brady said, my phone rings 24 hours a day, much to my wife's chagrin, but that's what keeps the thing going.
So we're coming up close to the end of our hour together. And what I'd like to do is kind of a quick round robin. If you could each give us a piece of advice. And I'm going to start with Lonnie, because Lonnie, you've been off camera for a bit. We'll start with you. We'll go to Elizabeth and then work our way through. So one quick piece of advice that you would, as a takeaway, what would you like to have people take away from this conversation?
One key takeaway that I get, Jody, and if you listen to this holistically, right, because I had the great opportunity of presenting and then listening, is communication, right? It sounds like it's communication internal, it's communication external, it's communication with your peers, your neighbors, and making sure that you don't just communicate, you can communicate with a purpose. So that was the key takeaway that I wrote down during this entire thing, is the communications and intelligence is only as good as spreading it to the people that need to know it. So that would be my one key takeaway.
Liz, you're up.
Yeah, I think to echo what Lonnie was saying, it's that communication piece, both internally, externally, and building those partnerships. A lot of times from our end to, sometimes something that may have happened may seem super insignificant, but it can be really important for us too. So really just having that two-way street and, sharing both ways.
Brady?
Yeah, I think a takeaway from, and I'll keep, from the perspective of an auditor here, if you're an entity on this call and you're subject to having somebody like me come out and look at your physical security, be it low, medium, or SIP 14, definitely try to reach out, if you don't already, to your auditors that are in your region and try to build that relationship with them, because I can tell you, I'd much rather get a phone call and change the direction of what might be a non-compliance in the future by having that conversation and pointing them in the right direction. I'd rather do that than go write a P&C worksheet, at the end of an audit. So, and we all have a shared objective of protecting and keeping reliable the bulk electric system. So I know a lot of the auditors from the other regions, and if you don't have that relationship already, definitely look at building it.
Greg, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go in a little different direction and touch for the next 60 seconds or so on something Brady and Jim brought up, is the ALPR world, or any technology really. It's so helpful when you're trying to track down suspicious activity or investigate an incident. It can also be used proactively. I think ALPR is the best technological tool law enforcement has right now. I'm a little biased towards it, but I do believe that. One thing I'd like to say is don't neglect the policy side of it. ALPR is attacked by a lot of different agencies, the ACLU included, and maybe rightfully so, over privacy concerns. We in New Jersey handle it differently. There's several steps. Somebody doesn't drive past an ALPR and then Greg Demeter's face pops up on the screen as having been the driver. There's several steps we have to take in New Jersey as law enforcement to get to that point, and those are safeguards. So, but also the way we share the data, the way how long we're able to keep the data, whether as a private entity or a public entity, sharing between private entities like a utility and law enforcement, all should be codified in some way, shape, or form in a policy because it's going to protect you long term. We're going through that pain now in New Jersey. Now, maybe there are other entities out there that already has it, but if not, hopefully within about 4 to 6 months, we'll have a full slate of things that people can use as go-bys. But it's important to remember that because technology where you're capturing and keeping a lot of data on people could get your agency in a little bit of hot water if there aren't policies involved with it.
Good point. And ALPR is?
Automated license plate recognition. 10 years ago, we used to call it reader, but it's since morphed into recognition technology. Yes.
Excellent, because there might be some people on the the webinar that don't know the jargon. Yeah. And Jim.
Oh, yes, I'm still awake. Someone said it, I can't take credit for it, and I thought it was great. We always say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, but they added and what they know. And this is why I'm in partnership with Liz and with Greg and at the state police. That's just, I just can't stress enough. Preparedness is relationships, knowing who to call and what they have, or even if they can pass you on to someone else. It's been a great experience, and I hope I can keep doing it for quite a while.
And I concur, because this is relationships, and I can't thank each of you enough for coming on today and sharing your knowledge and your information and helping to develop this body of knowledge within the community. So thank you each. I think we're at the top of the hour, Jessica. Yes?
Yes, we are. I guess I'll give one last second for if anyone has any attendees have any questions that they want to drop into the chat. But otherwise, thank you all again so much.
Excellent. Lonnie, Brady, Elizabeth, or Liz, Jim, and Greg, thank you very, very much. And this will be recorded. And we have a question. Tony O'Donnell, can you unmute yourself? Or do we need to unmute you?
Yes.
There you are.
Thank you. Very, very informative. I really appreciate all that. Is there anything that is going on in terms of actually hardening substations to prevent something like Metcalf from happening? Or just here in Montana, I'm a PSC commissioner, that a few people here have hunting rifles and could just fire indiscriminately into substations. Is there anything, that anybody's doing to actually prevent damage from being caused from that?
Well, in New Jersey, we do have some substations who are now using ballistic walls, especially around transformers. So also berms, things of that sort. But the thing I'm beginning to worry about now is if you put up, we're always fighting the last war, you put up a ballistic wall and it drops something in by a drone. So we're always trying to catch you out.
Jody, I would need another hour to talk about all the anti-ballistic stuff that we do out here in the West. But there's a lot. And Montana's in my backyard, so I'm taking a look out there, that's for sure.
Well, contact me, Brady. Thank you very much for this webinar. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions real quick? If not, Jessica, take it away.
All right, well, that's it. Thank you guys so much. And thank you everyone for attending today. Our next innovation webinar will be June 20th. So keep a lookout on our social media and newsletters for more information on that. Thank you.